Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session Extending ArcGIS Enterprise Developer Technologies and Webhooks. My name is Joel, and I'm co-presenting with Han today. We're glad that you can be joining us virtually, and hopefully you get a chance to stop by the showcase and come say hi to us after this session or sometime this week. So a quick glance at what we plan to cover in this session. I will begin by introducing webhooks in ArcGIS Enterprise and share some examples of how you can get started with them. And then Han will get into the ArcGIS Enterprise SDK, talk about SOEs and SOIs and some of the recent additions their team has made on that front. Again, if you have any questions after the session, please stop by the showcase and we'd love to chat with you. All right, let's get started with webhooks. For those of you who may be new to webhooks, I always like to start with this slide to set the stage. Let's say you ordered something online and you're really excited about receiving it and you want to know if there are any updates related to shipping that product. You could go to the courier's website and check if the package has left the warehouse or if it's on its way to you. Or you could call customer service to find out. But both of those ways are not really practical, and the customer service department probably doesn't want to have to deal with a high volume of calls of customers asking where their packages are. Alternatively, on the courier website, there might be an option that you can select to say that you want to get notified of any updates related to your package. Now you can continue baking or knitting or whatever you're doing in quarantine, and rest assured that you will be notified if there is any update on the status of your package. And that's essentially what a webhook is. It's not having to continuously go out to retrieve the information. Rather, that information is sent to you when it becomes available. So webhooks were introduced in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7, and they allow you to provide other applications with event-driven information that is delivered through an HTTPS request. This enables you to create automated and integrative workflows, which creates new extensibilities of the ArcGIS Enterprise platform. Taking a look at this diagram here, we have our users interacting with the portal, and they're doing things like adding items to the organization, sharing them with each other. And let's say we want to trigger a webhook when one of these things happens. So we would create our webhook in the portal to subscribe to one of these events. Let's say when a new item is added to the portal. And so the next time a user adds an item to the portal, that webhook will be triggered and a payload will be sent out to a webhook receiver that you have provided. And then you can process that information. You can use it for operational intelligence to trigger some other back office workflow or to integrate it with another system. So if we think back to that first example of the package being delivered, the advantage of using webhooks is that you don't have to continuously poll the server to determine whether there is any information ready for you. Rather, the server will let you know when it has information for you, and this creates more opportunities to build automation into your workflows more efficiently. If you are new to using webhooks, there are three key terms we need to become familiar with. And the first is trigger event. This is the operation that you set to trigger your webhook. We use the URI pattern to specify this. And here we have an example of all of the trigger events for items in the organization. And so at the top line, you see we have /items that allows you to receive all the trigger events below for all items in your organization. Similarly, we also have trigger events for users and groups. And again, this is all documented and you can reference this in our help doc. But if there's something you don't see here, any particular events you'd like to see us support, definitely stop by the showcase and let us know your use case. The second term is payload, and this is the information that is being sent out from your portal to the webhook receiver. Each payload will follow a similar JSON schema to the one you see here. And taking a look at this example, at the top, we have this info object that has some high-level information about the webhook, the portal URL that it was sent from, and the timestamp that this webhook was triggered. Then we have some information about the operation itself. So here I can see that the following item, and this is the item ID, was shared, and I can see which user shared it, and I have their username and user ID. And then we also have this properties object, which tells us how the item was shared. And so here I see that the item was shared to everyone and a specific group, and that's indicated by that group ID. Every payload will follow a very similar schema with the exception of the properties object. That is, of course, going to differ depending on the event. But all of the variations of this properties object are highlighted in our documentation. And once you know the schema, you can then start to build logic so that you can parse the payloads coming into your webhook receiver. So maybe you only want to act on an event if it is shared to a specific group. You can then use the schema and the known group ID to build that logic. And that's actually what we're going to demonstrate shortly. And then finally, our third key term is the payload URL or webhook receiver. And this is the endpoint you are telling Portal to send the payloads to. So since the Portal sends these out as HTTPS post requests, the webhook receiver must be configured to communicate over HTTPS, and it must be reachable by the Portal. And there's so many options for configuring a payload URL. You can use one of the samples we have provided in the Enterprise SDK. You can build your own using something like Node.js or Python Flask, or you can tap into some really powerful third-party services like Microsoft's Power Automate, Integromat, Zapier, and get access to a wide range of applications. Okay, so let's get into a demo. The scenario is as an administrator of a distributed collaboration, I want to be notified anytime content is sent or received via my distributed collaboration. And if you've never worked with distributed collaboration, then this is your lucky day. Okay, so here I am in my ArcGIS Enterprise portal, and I'm looking at my collaborations. If you're not familiar with distributed collaboration, the main thing you need to understand is that you have groups linked to collaboration workspaces, and that's how content is shared between organizations. I share content to a group that's linked to a collaboration workspace that automatically gets synchronized to any participating organizations, and it works both ways. So here I have my group that's linked to a collaboration workspace, and essentially as the administrator of this collaboration, I want to know anytime an item is shared to this collaboration workspace because I want to know when our items are being shared outside of your organization, and I also want to know when new items are received to this group because I'm just curious to see what our collaboration partners are sharing with us. And so let's look at how we can set this up. So the first thing you need to do is you need to go to the ArcGIS portal directory. And if you've never been here, it's basically your fully qualified domain name / your web adapter / sharing. And here, once you're logged in as an administrator, you click on your org ID. And if you scroll to the bottom under child resources, you'll see webhooks. Click on that. And this is where you will create and manage your webhooks, as well as if you ever need to check on whether a payload was sent out successfully, you can look at a notification status table here as well. So we'll begin by creating our webhook. We'll call this Dev Summit Demo Webhook. And next, we need to provide our payload URL. As I said, there are a lot of options for how you can do this. In this case, I'm going to use Power Automate as my webhook receiver or payload URL. And so here I am in Power Automate. This is a Microsoft application, and it's a really cool tool. If you've never used it, you can basically integrate with all of your Office applications plus a ton of other third-party applications, which is really neat. So I'm creating a flow here, and the first thing I need to specify is what's going to initiate my flow. And just think of a flow as your workflow. And so in this case, it's going to be when an HTTPS request is received. And so you can see under trigger, I have that option. Next, I need to provide a payload schema. And so if I come to the documentation, you'll see here we have an example of the payload. And so I can just copy that, nice and easy, and then say use sample payload to generate schema, paste that into here. And then I also need to provide the property that I'm interested in. So as I mentioned before that all of the variances of these properties are documented, and here they are. In this case, I want to know when an item is shared to a group that's linked to my collaboration workspace. And so the property I'm interested in is shared to group. So I'm just going to copy that and enter it here. This is an array, so I need to specify that in this sample, and that's it. I'll click done. Okay, so we have our payload schema here. The next step is I need to add a step that will allow me to check all incoming payloads to see whether any items have been shared to this group, which is linked to my collaboration workspace. So I'm just going to copy this group ID, and you'll see why in a second, and come back to Power Automate, and I'm going to add a new step. And under actions, I'm going to add a condition, and under choose a value, I'm going to choose this share to groups property, which we added. And I'm going to say, if that property contains this group ID, do something. And what I wanted to do is, let's say I have a Teams channel and I want to be notified in that Teams channel that an item has been shared to this group. And so, as I mentioned, Power Automate is really powerful, especially if you're a Office 365 customer and you are using a lot of these Microsoft applications. So if I search Teams and I want to message someone, this one looks good. We can post a message as the Flowbot to a user, and I'll just set that user as myself. So I'll click on this. I'll start typing my name in. And because I'm signed in with my account, it has access to my address book. I'll click on that. And then in the message, I can write a custom message. So I can say, hey, Joel, the following item. And I can pull in these attributes to make this message dynamic. So I'll say item, was shared to your collaboration group. Go check it out and I'll just add my portal URL. And that's it. Okay, and so just to go over the steps, my payloads are going to be directed to this webhook receiver. And once I save this, I'll get my post URL here. And once received, we're going to check that share to group property to see whether it contains this group ID, which is the group linked to my collaboration workspace. And if yes, then we're going to post a message in Microsoft Teams to let me know that an item was shared to collaboration group. And so this will be triggered when someone in my organization shares an item to the collaboration group, or when I receive an item from another organization, which will automatically be shared to the collaboration group. And so I'll click Save. And my post URL has been generated. I'll copy this and come back to our create webhook form, and I'll enter it here. So you also have the option to add a secret. So this can be any kind of key that you generate if you want to verify all incoming payloads to your webhook receiver. You can do that. You have some configuration properties here. So you can specify, how many times you want to attempt to make a request before you deactivate this webhook. And this is where you specify which events you want to trigger this webhook. And so you can either have everything sent to you by choosing this radio button, or you can define which events you want to be triggered. In this case, I'm just going to do /items. So any event pertaining to any item in my organization is going to be sent to this payload URL, but we have that logic to parse it and process it once we receive it. So I'll click Create Webhook. I can see that it's created. Okay, so we can come back to my portal. Let's say this is the item I want to share. I'm just going to minimize this window and bring my Teams chat over. And so this is our item that we're going to share to the collaboration group. So go to Share and Edit Group Sharing, and I'm going to share it to my collaboration group. And almost immediately, I should see a message posted in Teams, and there it is, letting me know that an item was shared to my collaboration group. And that's how easy it is to get started with webhooks. And so this was an example of, someone within my organization sharing content to this group, but also when items are received to this group through distributed collaboration, the webhook will be triggered as well, and a message will be posted in this chat. Yeah, so what's next? If you've been keeping a tab on things and we have said this is one of the areas we are focusing on supporting next, being able to support referenced and hosted feature layer editing events. So when attributes are added, deleted, or modified. The team continues to actively meet on this, and this is still a high priority item for us. And it's something we're hoping to get out to you sometime soon. If this is something that is of interest to you, then please come see us at the showcase, as we are still collecting requirements around this, and we'd love to get your feedback. Some resources for you. So if you are using ArcGIS Online, you're in luck because they recently introduced the capability to create hosted feature service webhooks. And so there was a great blog written by the team that you can check out there. As well, you can check out our GitHub repository. There we have samples of different webhook receivers in Node.js, Python Flask, Java, all to help you get started, as well as some workflows that you can check out, such as creating a chatbot to help you manage your items and check for item completeness. So some cool examples there to get you inspired. And then, of course, we have our documentation that you can check out and some blogs we've written in the past. And that's it for webhooks. I'll pass it on to Han.
Hello, everyone. I will take over from here and discuss more developer technologies to extend ArcGIS Enterprise. In this session, I will mainly focus on SOE and SOI with ArcGIS Enterprise SDK. Here is my agenda. I will first talk about ArcGIS Enterprise SDK, and then discuss SOE and SOI. And last, I will go through the new features introduced in Enterprise SDK 10.8.1 and also do a demo to show how to build an SOI using the new feature, Maven integration. Let's first look at ArcGIS Enterprise SDK. Enterprise SDK provides tools and APIs to extend ArcGIS Enterprise functionalities. So far, it's mainly for developing SOEs and SOIs for pro-based services. It was introduced in 10.6.1. The API that Enterprise SDK provides has a similar flavor as ArcObjects, but it's a separate API. ArcObjects SDK provides a broader API for both desktop customizations and SOE/SOI development, which is only for ArcMap-based services, while Enterprise SDK has a more focused API for developing SOE and SOI for pro-based services. And in today's session, we will concentrate on SOE and SOI with Enterprise SDK. Let's move on to our next topic, SOE, Server Object Extension. Let's see how an SOE works. This is a server client diagram, and we can see no SOE is attached with the service yet. The client sends requests to the server object through the service endpoint. The service endpoint is essentially the service URL that client applications can use to access the service. One service can have multiple service endpoints. These service endpoints point to different resources and operations, such as query, export map, and so on. Now, let's attach an SOE to this service. This SOE sits on the server side with the server object. It exposes its own service endpoints. Within this SOE, we can define the request parameters, request format, execution logic, and the response content. When the client application communicates with the SOE, everything can be defined by the SOE developer, including request, response, and operation logic. Because of this, SOE often requires a custom client application that is able to prepare the request and parse the response. So what can an SOE do? SOE can create new custom service functions. The new service functions can be defined via new REST resources or operations, or new SOAP methods. We can also define custom request parameters and formats in the SOE. And similarly, the response format can be defined as well, such as a JSON response or a file response returned to the client. We can also use Esri libraries to implement custom workflows. For example, since a full geometry API is provided in the SDK, we can use the SOE for spatial analysis, geometry process, and even geotransformation. And we can also use the geodatabase API to let the SOE connect to an enterprise geodatabase and perform custom editing and query activities. And these can help us make the SOE form a streamlined workflow and take advantage of the server-side processing. Because usually fine-grained code on the server side works faster than processing data or geometry from the client side through multiple different steps. Now, let's look at SOE's use cases. Typically, SOE can be used to execute custom logic on a service, especially when the default service operations cannot meet your business needs. The most common use cases for SOE are custom query, custom editing, or spatial analysis functions. For example, here I have a spatial query SOE. By providing a location center point and distance, my SOE can return all the features of the service that fall within the distance of the center point. Furthermore, this SOE can also cut the existing features on the fly to match their boundary defined by the input. Next, let's talk about SOI. How does an SOI work? This is the same client-server diagram we've seen earlier. Let's add an SOI to the service. We can see the SOI also sits on the server side, on top of the server object. When a request is sent, this SOI intercepts the request and decides whether or not to modify the request parameters, and then the SOI will pass the request to the server object for processing. After the server object has a response ready, the SOI intercepts the response again, and this would give the SOI another chance to modify the response. And after that, the SOI will pass the response back to the client. To summarize what an SOI can do, SOI can read and modify incoming request and the output response. It can also block request or response and return an error message instead. In addition, SOI can obtain the logged-in user's identity, such as capturing the username or the name of the group that the user belongs to. The other benefit with SOI is that it can work seamlessly with existing ArcGIS clients, because the SOI is basically customizing existing service operations, and the SOI is completely hidden from the client. Currently, SOI supports intercepting map service, feature service, OGC service, image service, and utility network service. SOI for pro-based image service and utility network service are introduced at 10.8.1, and we will go into details later. Now, let's look at how an SOI can be used to solve real business problems. The first use case for SOI is logging, auditing, and metering. This is the simplest scenario because in this scenario, the SOI is not modifying any request or response. All it does is to log messages when certain operation is performed. For example, when a service operation is requested by an end user, the SOI will log a message in server logs to record which user performs what operation at what time. And this will help the enterprise administrator to monitor or audit their users' activities. If you have your own logging mechanisms, such as a log database, you can write logs to the database from your SOI too. Another point worth mentioning is that, based on the SOI logs, we can get the end user's usage of a certain service and charge the end user based on their service usage. And this metering function is used more often among GIS service providers. The next use case is fine-grained user access control. Since SOI can get the current logged-in user's identity and group information for each request, we can use this information to help limit which user or which group can access which service resources, service data, or service operations. For example, here I use an SOI to grant different user access to different layers. Both of these two users are accessing the same service, but my SOI allows the two users to see different layers. SOI can also be used for lots of data manipulation tasks. Let's start from data validation. Data validation usually happens when we pre-process requests from an SOI. Here is an example of using SOI to validate add features operation. Assume I have some new features to add through my feature service, but before sending those features JSON to the server object, I can use an SOI to check if all the features have valid geometry and attributes, and my SOI can reject unqualified features and only pass those qualified features to the server object for processing. In other words, only features that meet my criteria can be added through my feature service. The next use case is data filtering and data enrichment. Data enrichment usually happens when we post-process response. Here is an example of a query response. The content of a query response is usually a feature collection in JSON or GeoJSON format. When this feature collection is generated by the server object and sent to the SOI can pull extra data from an external data source to integrate into this feature collection. This will enrich the query response. At the same time, the SOI can also filter certain information from the query response. So in this way, the client application will receive the enriched and filtered query response. Another data enrichment use case is to add a watermark for export map operation. When every time a map service is rendered, it will always show your own watermark on the map. And this works regardless of what types of client application you use to render the map service. Now, let's move on to our next topic. What's new with SOE and SOI in Enterprise SDK 10.8.1? In 10.8.1, several new features are introduced in ArcGIS Enterprise SDK. Maven integration support, shared instance support, utility network SOE and SOI, and image service SOI. Among these features, Maven integration support is only for Java SOE and SOI development, while the other three features are applied to both .NET and Java. Let's look at the first feature, Maven integration support. Java SOE and SOI projects can now be managed under the Maven framework, and this allows us to take advantage of the capabilities provided by the Maven framework. For example, a variety of Java IDEs can now be used to develop an SOE or SOI, such as Intellij, Eclipse, NetBeans, and more, as long as the Java IDE supports Maven framework and JDK 11. The next capability is automatic project build process. Because building an SOE or SOI project follows the Maven build lifecycle, we can run the Maven project build command automatically, which makes it easier to automate the SOE or SOI build and deployment process. Next, built-in unit testing framework by JUnit can be used. In Maven integration, the Maven SOE or SOI archetypes are used as project templates, which also include built-in unit testing framework. The unit testing framework allows you to write your own unit testing code for your SOE or SOI project. When the project is built, the unit test can be run automatically to validate your code. And last but not least, you can also reference third-party libraries from the Maven central repository in your project's POM file, and you can take advantage of the Maven project version control and dependency management in your SOE and SOI development. Now, let's discuss the process of developing SOE or SOI in the Maven framework. Before start building a new SOE or SOI project, you must make sure to set up the development environment properly. And this includes installing Enterprise SDK, JDK, and Maven. You also need to configure the environment variables accordingly. And last, you can run the SDK's install Maven artifacts tool, which deploys the required SDK's Maven artifacts to the Maven local repository. And after that, you can start creating your first SOE or SOI project either using a Java IDE or using the Maven command. I will not go into details about using the Maven command today, and you can visit the hyperlink here to find out more details. Next, I will do a quick demo to walk you through how to create a simple Java SOI from Archetype in Intellij. I will also show how the simple SOI can be deployed and tested. This is my development environment. I have already installed ArcGIS Enterprise SDK, JDK, and Maven. So I will just demonstrate how the environment variables should be configured and go from there. First, we need to go to Properties, Advanced System Settings, Environment Variables. Under the System Variables, we can see Java Home is set using the JDK path. And we should also see this ent devkit Java environment variable, which is automatically set when you install Enterprise SDK. The other environment variable you need to set is path. Let's open it. And you should see both the JDK bin path and the Maven bin path set here. And now we can click OK and OK. You can also check whether your environment variables are set properly by using the command prompt. If you type Java version, the JDK version should be returned, and this version number should meet the system requirement of the SDK. Similarly, we can check Maven version and make sure this Maven version is returned and meets the system requirement. Now, we should be ready to install the SDK's Maven artifacts by using the batch script tool. The batch script tool is located at the Enterprise SDK's installation location. By default, it's at C drive, Program Files, ArcGIS, Enterprise SDK, Java, Maven. And we can run this tool now. So this batch script tool installs 6 SDK artifacts. So you should see 6 build success printed out. You can read the SDK documentation for more details about those 6 artifacts. Once this batch script tool finishes executing, we will be ready to create our first SOI project. Okay, it's finished now. So we can close the command prompt now, and let's open Intellij and build our first SOI project. So choose New Project here, and select Maven option on the left. Make sure the project SDK is set to JDK 11. And we can check Create from Archetype. So this allows us to create an SOI using the SOI archetype. Maven archetype is very similar to project template. It defines how the project is constructed and built, and it can also populate some boilerplate code once the project is created. So now we need to add the SOI Maven archetype first. And click Add Archetype button. For group ID, enter com.esri.arcgis.enterprise.sdk. For artifact ID, we use SOI-archetype. And version here should be 10.8.1. Click OK. Now we can see the SOI archetype is listed here, and select this archetype and click Next. So we can define a product name here, Simple SOI Demo, and leave everything else as default, and click Next. So on this page, there is a required property that we should put, which is the SOI name. So click the Add button and put SOI name as the name here, and the value will be Simple SOI Demo. The SOI name is a required property that you must define here, otherwise the SOI project cannot be created. The value of this property will be used as the SOI class name, so make sure it's a valid Java class name. And we can click OK now. There are other properties that can be defined here, such as display name, description, and so on, but they all have default values, so we can change them later after the project is created. And we can click Finish now. So you can see how this SOI project is constructed. If we open this projects folder, we can see there is no source code or SOI class generated yet. And we notice the log messages at the bottom run window show that lots of artifacts are being pulled from the Maven central repository. And later on, you will see more folders and files show up under this project. Now we can see build success, which indicates the project is successfully created. And if we expand the source folder, we can see it contains a main folder and a test folder. The SOI class is generated in the main folder. And if we open this simple SOI demo class, we notice lots of boilerplate code has already been generated, and some default values are applied, such as the display name. You can change the SOI display name to be something more descriptive instead of the default one here. The display name will show on ArcGIS Server Manager and help us identify the SOI when we deploy it. Similarly, you can also change the SOI description. Next, let's look at the test folder. The test folder has a similar class, Simple SOI Demo Test, which contains the unit testing code for this project. Right now, it only has some boilerplate code, but you can also write your own testing code. For now, I will just leave it as is. Running a Maven install to build the project will automatically run this unit test, and if the test fails, the project will fail to build too. So if this happens, you need to check this test class and find the cause of the test failure. Last, let's look at the POM file. The POM file holds important information about project configurations. For example, the maven.compiler defines the Java compiler used to compile this project. In our case, it's JDK 11. There are also some enterprise SDK dependencies and plugins included, such as the ArcGIS Enterprise SDK dependency for 10.8.1. And the other required SDK plugin defined is the SDK plugin. So these artifacts shouldn't be removed in this POM file. And we also have the project build configuration here. This targets tag should be set to 10.8 for this 10.8.1 SOI. It's not necessary to put the minor version number here, so we should leave it as is. This is the version of the SOI that will be generated, which should also match the version of Arcgis Server that the SOI will be deployed to. So we can build the project now. Click the Maven tool on the right side, expand Lifecycle, and click Install. And this does a Maven install, which exports the project to a .soe file. So let's keep an eye on the left side of the project structure, because later on we should see a target folder generated. So now we can see build success, and the target folder shows up, which contains the .soe file. And then we can upload this .soe file to Arcgis Server to deploy this SOI. So now let's copy this SOI file's path. And then we can go to Arcgis Server Manager to upload this SOI. So let's go to Server Manager and log in. Go to Site, Extensions, Add Extension, choose File, and here we can paste the .soe file and click Add. So now this SOI is deployed to your ArcGIS server. And we can see the display name shows the simple SOI demo, which is what we define in the source code. And the provider shows ArcGIS Pro, which means this SOI is compiled by using ArcGIS Enterprise SDK, and it can be used with Pro-based services. There are 3 buttons under Action. The first one is Extension Information. This one tells us more information about this extension, like whether it's an SOI or SOE, and the type of service this extension can be used with, such as map service or image service. So let's close it now. The second button is Edit button. This one is used to update your existing SOI or SOE. It is used very often for developers. For example, if I update this SOI's source code and rebuild my SOI, I can click this button and choose the updated .soe file to update this extension. The last button is Delete button, which is used to remove the extension from your ArcGIS server, and we can try it later. Now, let's enable this SOI with a service. We can just use the sample world cities map service, and we can go to Capabilities and double-click this SOI to enable it, and click Save and Restart. And this will restart your map service with the SOI enabled. Since this SOI contains boilerplate code which logs info-level messages when certain REST request is captured, we can test it in the server logs. Okay, so the service is restarted now, and let's go to logs first to enable info-level log messages. And let's go to Settings and change the log level to Info and click Save. Make sure your log filter is also set to Info. And now we can test the SOI's logging function with a REST request. So let's go to the Services REST endpoint and click Export Map Operation. So now we've already sent a REST request on the browser. Let's check the server logs. And we can see here is a server log that is logged by our SOI. It also logs the input parameters we just sent. That's all. This demo only shows a simple example of the SOI's logging function to help you get started. If you're interested in learning about implementing more functions, you can check the Enterprise SDK GitHub repository for more samples. Now I will move on to our next new feature with Enterprise SDK 10.8.1. The next feature is shared instance support. Starting from 10.8.1, services that are configured to use shared instances can now enable SOEs and SOIs. To allow shared instance support, on the server side, you will need to upgrade your ArcGIS server to 10.8.1 or later version. There is nothing else on the server side that you need to configure or install. On the SOE and SOI side, you have to enable this capability in your source code. To achieve this, you must first install 10.8.1 or later version of Enterprise SDK, and then in the SOE or SOI's source code, set the Supports Shared Instances property to True, just like these 2 screenshots. And last, rebuild the project, and the extension will be ready to be enabled with shared instances. Since the Supports Shared Instances property is default to false, if you don't explicitly set it to true, your SOE or SOI still cannot be enabled with shared instances. The other point I'd like to highlight is the best practices to develop SOEs and SOIs for shared instances. If you want to allow your SOE or SOI to support shared instances, you shouldn't use global variables or static variables in your SOE or SOI, especially when the SOE or SOI will be enabled with multiple services that are set to use shared instances. This is because global variables can be accessed by different services that share the same instance, which can cause unexpected values to be assigned by other services running on the same instance. However, it is safe to use local variables because the scope of the local variables is within the current service, and local variables are not shared with other services. As an SOE or SOI developer, only when you ensure you follow the best practices, you can make your SOE or SOI support shared instances. In 10.8.1, we can also develop an SOE or SOI for utility network services. In an SOE or SOI, you can now directly access the utility network's schema, properties, and topology. You can also manage subnetworks and network associations. And you can even perform trace analysis and write your custom trace operations. You can find the utility network tracing SOE sample on the SDK's GitHub repository. ArcGIS Enterprise SDK also supports building image service SOI now. To create an image service SOI, you should use image server in .NET and image service in Java as the SOI's server object type as these two examples. You must also upgrade your Arcgis Server to 10.8.1 to allow the image service to work with the SOI. Similar to a map service SOI, image service SOI can also intercept REST, SOAP, and OGC requests and responses. That's all we have. We hope you find this session helpful. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for all of the questions. I'll begin by going through some of these webhook questions that we received. So the first one, will webhook support at parity with Portal come to ArcGIS Online? So basically, will ArcGIS Online have parity with the webhook events? It is on their roadmap. I'm not sure when they plan to implement it. They kind of went the opposite direction we did by supporting feature service events first, but I do believe it's on their roadmap. It would be good to ask that question in the ArcGIS Online channel to see if anyone has some insight for you there. Next question, could I use this to track user storage in the data store and use the Python API to change their role from creator to a lower role until they clean up some data? So that's an excellent use case. At the moment, no, webhooks, we don't support this event, but it would be interesting to learn more about this. We are trying to expand our notification story via email notifications as well. So there could be an interesting use case there. So if you'd like to direct message me after this, I'd love to learn more about this requirement. Is there a way to use webhooks without Portal through the ArcGIS server? No, at the moment, you have to register the webhook through ArcGIS Enterprise portal. With that said, a good kind of thing to point out here is that in the future, we plan to support ArcGIS server events. So when a geoprocessing job completes, those are events we want to support in the future. But if there is more information you can give me around this requirement, yeah, feel free to send me a direct message and I'd love to chat. How can webhooks be utilized to enforce data quality published by our members to our portal, such as enforcing descriptions, snippets, etc.? Ryan, this is a great question. At past dev summits and user conferences, we've done a lot of demos on this exact workflow. If you want to send me a DM, I can share some resources with you where we looked at this, but essentially we created a webhook that monitored new items being added and published. And anytime that event was triggered, it fired a Python script that would then go and check that item for completeness, look at the metadata, the description, the tags, and make sure it matches up with the organization standards. I see a question coming in, how do we direct message you? So in the Ask Our Experts, you should be able to search us up by name, and then you'll see an option to direct message us. If you don't see that, you can always stop by the ArcGIS Enterprise chat and talk to us there, and then I can start a direct message conversation with you. Looks like the next question is for you, Orhan, or should I just jump to the webhook questions?
Yeah, I think we can answer all the webhooks questions first.
Okay. Do you have some examples of some webhooks available in Power Automate? Yes, we sure do. We've done a ton of demos and sessions creating webhooks using Power Automate. So I'd love to share those with you. Same thing, either if you can't find me via direct message, just message me in the ArcGIS Enterprise chat in the Ask Our Expert section, and I'd be happy to share some of those resources with you, Mark. Will feature service webhook support be available for non-federated or non-hosted ArcGIS server sites? That's a great question. At the moment, the scope is to support federated and hosted feature services, but this is still under design. And if there is a requirement here, it's something we could potentially add to the roadmap in the future, definitely. But so far, the overwhelming feedback we've gotten is that supporting federated and hosted feature services, that's where most of the desire has been. Thanks for that question. If an item is shared to a new group, does the webhook payload list all groups the item is shared with, or only the new groups? So the payload will only list the new groups that it was shared with. The idea here is that you'd use the Python API and make another request after you know that the item sharing was updated. You could use the Python API and then get a total list of how that item is being shared in the organization or outside the organization. The sharing endpoint is off by security best practice. Do we need to deploy via Python for ArcGIS? So I am assuming you mean registering your webhook, and the answer is yes. You could use the Python for ArcGIS in that case to register your webhook. And that was supported in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7 as well. Will webhooks be supported in ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes? Yes, it will be. And it looks like our portal is internal behind firewall. Can we still set up webhooks? You can. In this case, you wouldn't be able to potentially use some of the third-party services, but you could deploy your own webhook receiver using something like Node.js. And in that GitHub URL, we have some examples there. We created some web servers using Node.js and Python Flask. And so you'd be able to set that up internally and take advantage of webhooks. And I think I answered all the webhook questions.
Okay, I will take over and answer all the SOE, SOI questions. So I will talk about the topics that are asked very often in this Q&A session, instead of going through each and every one, because some of the questions are related to each other. So the first question is, are SOE and SOIs, will SOEs and SOIs be supported in ArcGIS Enterprise on Kubernetes? So we do have plans for supporting SOE and SOI on Kubernetes, but for now we don't have a timelines for when this feature will be available yet. If you are interested in using SOE or SOI on Kubernetes, we can connect after this session, and we can talk about what do you need with SOE and SOI on Kubernetes. So this is the first one. And then next, I would like to discuss a little bit more about road ahead for the next few releases with Enterprise SDK. So because this is not covered in our session. So in the next few releases, we are going to expose network dataset APIs in Enterprise SDK. So that will be similar to as how we did with utility network APIs. So basically, we exposed new APIs for utility network database, and to help you with query and read access to the database. So the other feature we are going to introduce in the future is to support interceptors for hosted feature service and other types of services. I do see in the questions people asking about SOI for geoprocessing services. So I would like to connect with whoever asked these questions and talk into more details about it, because for now, we don't have immediate plans for SOI for geoprocessing services, but we would like to know how you would like to use SOI for GP service. The The other question related to GP service and SOE, SOI is that well, what should we use in terms of SOE or GP service? So the answer is SOE doesn't support async operations, while GP service does, which means if you would like to implement a custom logic for long-time data processing, like to query or process large data set, it will be preferred to use GP service. And you can write your own custom Python tool and publish it as a custom GP service to achieve the need. So in this scenario, GP service will be better than SOE to suit your needs. But if your SOE is doing some like quick process, like data read, query, that doesn't take a long time to process, then either one is fine, depending on how which development environment you like, whether you want to use Python for GP service or you want to use .NET or C# for SOE, and you are comfortable with writing fine-grained ArcObjects code. So yeah, and then the other feature I would like to bring up for our road ahead with Enterprise SDK is that we're going to improve the capabilities to access different resources across the ArcGIS Enterprise from within the SOE and SOI. So this will include allowing SOE or SOI to access different service information and also certain user and group information. So the last one we are considering in the future is custom data support. So basically, we would like to provide a solution for hosting custom data source as a feature service on ArcGIS Enterprise. So if you are interested in any of these new features that I talked about, feel free to get in touch with me directly. Like you can direct message me or reach out through the ArcGIS Enterprise channel, and we can discuss more about your business needs. And I also see other lots of questions coming to Pro SOE SOI versus ArcObjects SOE SOI. So ArcObjects SOE SOI is developed by using ArcObjects SDK, and it is for ArcMap-based services. While Pro SOE SOI is developed by using ArcGIS Enterprise SDK, and it is for pro-based services. So these are the major difference, and you cannot mix match to use both. So basically, ArcObjects SOE SOI cannot be used with pro-based services, and Enterprise SDK SOE SOI cannot be used with ArcMap-based services. And in terms of the API reference, so you can think the Enterprise SDK's API as a subset of an ArcObject, the ArcObject. So because ArcObjects SDK provides a broad API for both desktop side development with some UI, ArcGIS engine components, and also SOE SOI development. For the Enterprise SDK, it basically extracts the SOE SOI fine-grained code part and expose it to allow users to develop SOE SOI for pro-based services. In terms of the client to communicate with the ArcObjects SOE or pro-based SOE, it doesn't really matter because you can write an SOE client by .NET, Java, or JavaScript API, and the client application doesn't even have to be Esri client. Like you can write a generic .NET client to send REST or SOAP requests to interact with your SOE. So from this perspective, whether using Enterprise SDK SOE SOI or ArcObjects SOE SOI shouldn't really affect much in terms of your client application. For consuming SOI from the client application, because SOI is embedded within your service, so it is not really visible to your service client. So from this point, it also doesn't matter if you have what client to use to interact with your services with SOI enabled. The next topic I want to discuss is about migration. So some people ask, what's the efforts to migrate? Is it easier to migrate from ArcObjects to Enterprise SDK? For most of database API, geometry API, it should be easy to migrate from Arc objects to Enterprise SDK because the most of these APIs should be the same. So the only difference is that some of the API we have, for example, IMAP server 2, 3, 4 in ArcObjects SDK, we combine them as IMAP server in Enterprise SDK. So you may have to change your interfaces a little bit to remove the 2, 3, 4 to replace it with whatever we have in the Enterprise SDK. For the migration steps, for .NET SOE SOI, you have to create a new SOE SOI project using Enterprise SDK, and then copy your code to the new project. You cannot use the existing ArcObjects SOE SOI and rebuild it. That will not work. So that's a head up for that. And for Java SOE SOI, so before 10.8, we have the Eclipse plugin for SOE SOI. So in that case, you just need to replace your arcobjects.jar file with the Enterprise SDK jar file and recompile the project. And for 10.8.1 or later versions, since we're using Maven integration, so you have to create a new Maven project using Enterprise SDK, and then copy paste your code to the Maven project. Just one last question I want to talk about in terms of performance. So performance for performance with SOI, since SOI will capture every request that comes to your service, which is actually okay from the performance perspective. But if you need to process your request or response, that is where the performance will hit, especially when you process the response JSON. Processing the request is also fine because the request is usually very simple JSON parameters, so it's easier to parse and shouldn't cause much of overhead. But if you need to query the response, especially for example for a feature service query response, that can be very expensive. So the best practice is that if you can limit your SOI like process logic in your request process, that will be preferred instead of doing that from your response. So I see there are more questions. I will write down those questions that I haven't answered in our ArcGIS Enterprise channel, or you can ask those questions again in the ArcGIS Enterprise channel, or direct contact me and we can get the rest of the questions answered. I think we're running out of time.
I think we still have 5 minutes.
Oh, do we? Okay. All right. So let me. Okay, let me take some questions. So people are asking about get started tutorial for SOE SOI. So you can check that in the developers.esri.com site and looking for ArcGIS Enterprise SDK. That help doc has our latest documentation on Enterprise SDK.
I think we have maybe. I think that's it for our time, Han.
Okay, one more question. Somebody asked, can I cache data in a shared instance SOI? So this is very tricky. You need to be careful with shared instance SOI because things are shared within a shared instance by several different services can interfere with each other. So you can cache data in shared instance SOI, but you need to be very clear which service is accessing what data instead of allowing a shared cache data for all the services and intentionally. If it's intentionally, that's fine, but you just need to be cautious about that. Okay, I think I'm good.